What we've got here is a mid-19th century Chinese cash note. I'm actually going to drop the screen on my laptop so I can watch my monitor because the monitor is a lot larger. These notes, I don't know when the counterfeits were made, but we've got a diagnostic on these which is real easy. Counterfeiters like to sign their work. They want to be able to identify their own material when they run across it in the market after they've already distributed it. So on these cash notes, down here in this corner, you see these two waves that are facing each other? They're supposed to look like this over here. Waves in synchronization. You wouldn't expect to find waves crashing against each other in an ocean. This is all of this stuff at the bottom is all supposed to be waves. So if you find one of these with the waves that are facing, that's a fake. It's a modern fake. I don't know when they were made, but they're not very old. If we look at the back of this note, it's pretty clean. You barely see any evidence that there's stamps on the other side. There's a little bit of discoloration here in the middle where some of that, the main seal is coming through. But if you look at a genuine piece, you got both waves facing in the same direction on each side. And on the back, you have very strong evidence of all of that old seal ink coming through the paper. These notes are like 170, 180 years old. And the ink that's used for those seals is a very greasy ink. It's a paste. And over time, it comes through the paper like this. So even though the waves may be facing in the correct direction, and there are lots of fakes out there that way as well, if you turn it over and it doesn't look like this, but instead looks like this, then be very suspicious of it. You know, I can't guarantee that every note that looks like this is going to be bad, but they have a hard time replicating this kind of soaking, because you can see that not only has it come through right where the seal was, it's also working its way out into the paper all around the edges. And when you look at one of these under ultraviolet, it's very conspicuous. You can see all the places where the grease is showing through. Now this seal over on this side should be showing through. Well, you can't see it because it's masked by this seal on the face, which is a different kind of ink, which doesn't show through on the back. You notice that that seal over here isn't in evidence at all, because it's not using the same kind of waxy ink that the other seals use. But underneath this, there is some soak through of the seal on the back that we just saw, the three characters. All right, here's a Bank of Taiwan note under Japanese administration, 1904, a 5 yen note. Here we have one that purports to be a specimen. I cannot get this. Oh, there we go. I wanted all you folks' heads out of the way so I could see the side of the note here. There's the specimen marking here, Mihon, and 0 serial numbers. The first time I encountered one of these was back in 1975. Mel Steinberg advertised one as a specimen. I ordered it and got it and looked at it and said, and there's before, you know, emails or anything except telephone or letters. I corresponded back to Mel and said, the paper is unwatermarked. The printing is not intaglio. It looks to me like a hell note. A note that was printed like all the other hell notes that we've seen, except most of them are fantasy designs. So he reluctantly refunded my money, or actually, since I still had the note, I guess we negotiated a reduced price. But I saw another one of these things in an auction only 3 or 4 years ago, so they're still out there. You need to watch for them. A true specimen should at least be printed with the same technology as the genuine note. It may not be on genuine paper. Not all specimens come on the paper with the proper watermark. But in this case, the technology is not intaglio, and the paper is incorrect as well. So be watching for those. Here's an outright fantasy. During World War II, when the Chinese lost Nanking and had to move inland to Chongqing, the Japanese were gobbling up all the FAPI, that's F-A-P-I, which were the notes of the 4 banks that issued nationalist currency that had international exchange standing. That was the Bank of China, the Central Bank of China, the Farmers Bank of China, and the Bank of Communications. This note is on the Bank of China. Well, because they were exchanging it all out of circulation for their puppet bank notes, specifically so they could spend it in international commerce, the Chinese government said, all right, we're not going to honor those unless they have the overprint Chongqing, which indicates that it was issued after we were displaced. Well, the issue with this one is that the 10 yuan note was so low value by the time this is all happening that it was never overprinted. The overprints are only on denominations above 10 yuan. Not only that, if it were correct, it would say Chongqing in Roman letters here, in Latin letters, right across above the 10 yuan denomination. And the person who created this fantasy didn't bother to put Chongqing on the back in Latin letters. They first were overprinted in black, like this one is, and then the overprint was actually put into the plate. These are American banknote products, and they got ABN to put the characters in Chinese on the face and in English, if you will, on the back, right in the main plate. So they come both ways, with black overprints or with the overprint in the color of whatever the note was, whether it was brown or green or violet. But the 10 yuan does not appear legitimately with any Chongqing overprint. And this is reasonably modern, within the past 10 years. This is the high denomination of the Federal Reserve Bank of China, one of the Japanese puppet banks. This was for North China. These were issued in Beijing, Peking at the time. And it's intaglio on watermark paper, a pretty high quality product. They had intaglio printing capability in Peking at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, Peking. There's no imprint on these notes. And not all of them were printed there. Many of them were printed in Japan and then brought over to China for the puppet government to use. But the counterfeit of that, the modern counterfeit, is either lithographed or letterpress, I don't remember which, but not intaglio. And the serials are very crude. The serials and seals are quite crude. You also find this with no block numeral here. The brackets are there, but the numeral was omitted. So Fred and I had a long discussion when we were writing Swan Boling about how do you describe an unfinished note, which is in fact a counterfeit that was unfinished. And my contention was that we describe unfinished notes as proofs, and therefore it's a proof counterfeit. But I don't remember how we ended up listing it. We made quite clear that we were talking about one of these things with no numeral for the block. You can see the difference in the quality. It's not real obvious here in this picture, other than the shade, and obviously the quality of the serial numbers. But the printing quality over here is far below the printing quality over here. Here we have a genuine note printed by American Banknote and 2 modern replicas for sale to tourists. And they're making these with running serial numbers and putting them up in packs with straps around them so that the street vendor can pull the note out of what looks like an original strap, and has a lot of credibility because the strap is printed to reflect the note that's being vended, and it's all crisp, uncirculated. It looks like he's got original leftovers from before World War II. Only issue is that these are intaglio, and neither one of these is. Now this is intaglio, this one's letterpress, and this one's lithographed. In addition, note the serial numbers here. It should be blue on this 2,000 yuan note, not red. And the Shanghai should be in the main plate, intaglio, not overprinted later as this one was. This is actually a dark blue here. So the first thing you want to check, well, the absolutely first thing, you can check the date. 1947 is the correct date for these. This 1930 never existed. There was no 2,000 yuan note in the 1930 emissions. I think the 500 was the highest denomination in the 1930 series. It wasn't until the inflation kicked in late in the war and after the war that the high denominations began to be printed with dates of 1947. As I said, the next thing you want to check is what the printing technology is. This is what they look like under ultraviolet. You can see that the genuine note, it barely reacts. The lithograph note on modern bond paper that has brighteners in it, blasts you out of the room when you put UV on it. The letterpress one here is sort of in between, but they should be all quite dull under UV because they were not using paper that had artificial brighteners in them for genuine notes. Now here's the genuine note, and it's intaglio. You can see the raised ink on the surfaces here, and there would be some embossing of the paper to go with that. And here's one of the planchettes. The planchette is a security feature. It's a paper disc which is embedded in the slurry when the paper is made. It can be partially on the surface like this, or it can be completely buried inside the paper so you don't see it from either side, but you can find it by holding it up to a light and see the dark spot inside the paper. This planchette happens to have silk threads in it, a very unusual style of planchette. ABN used red and blue and yellow, which are almost impossible to see with the naked eye. But the yellow usually are UV reactive, so you stick them under UV and they brighten right up, whereas the blue and the yellow, blue and the red are not. These ones with the silk threads in the planchettes, that's very unusual. We did find that in some of the ABN printings of the Allied occupation notes for Germany, as well as this one right here. Now the next one, the one in the middle that we looked at before, that's letterpress. And you can see the ridges of ink along this straight line here, and along this line here. Straight edges and corners are good places to find the ink buildup where the ink has been pushed out to the edges of the letterpress print. Letterpress is like a rubber stamp. It's raised type, and you ink the surface of the type and then you press it to the paper, and if it's over inked or if you press it real hard, the ink gets squished out to the edges and forms these ridges along the edges, which is a diagnostic of letterpress printing. When you find that, then you're not finding intaglio. You can also see little bits and pieces through here that also show some of those ink ridges along the edges. The last one was lithographed. It's perfectly flat, It has planchettes. The one over here did not make any effort to reproduce the planchettes. You can't see them at all. The lithographed one did, but they're all printed on the paper. They're not in the paper. And they all appear then at the same place on every single note. So while this vendor is pulling a note out of a strap to sell you, if you see planchettes on it, check the next note in the strap. If it has planchettes in exactly the same place, then it's not original, because these planchettes are randomly distributed through the papers. You don't get them in the same place on consecutive notes or on any other note. You can also see that there's ink out here in the margin. You can see these yellow dots. It gives a little bit of a tone to the paper, so it's not quite so bright white. It makes it look a little more creamy. Those are invisible to the naked eye, but you throw a glass on them and you see anything out there in the margins, you're looking at something which is not original, because original notes don't have printing in the margins. These are the straps that they're putting on the fakes with a portrait that matches whatever the portrait is on the note. This is Sun Yat-sen, this is Chiang Kai-shek, and they both appeared on post-war notes of the nationalist government before they were evicted out to Taiwan. This is what a genuine American banknote company strap looks like. Nothing at all like the two fakes that we just saw on the previous slide. Uncle Mao, Chairman Mao, very popular fellow in collecting circles and heavily replicated for sale to tourists. We're going to be looking at two places on these notes, the tablet down here at the bottom and this leaf up here on the side. Now the fact that this has a short serial number is not disqualifying, because they didn't use leading zeros on this particular issue. So you do have genuine notes with short serials like that. So, you know, if this were a genuine note with a short serial, the fact that it had a short serial would not be evidence that it was not an original piece. Now we look at the tablet down here where the date is. You can see that everything is pretty regular. The edges are smooth and even. They're pixelating a little bit here as I blow it up. If we go down here and look at the fake, you can see all these dots all over the place. You get dots up in here, and you get rough edges here because of all the dots. Well, that's a screening process which is used to make a plate. You can see all the dots through here. When you take a photograph of an original note and make a plate to print from, you have to put it through a screen. It's called a halftone process to replicate any kind of shading which exists on the original piece. We don't have any shading down here, but up in the portrait there's shading, and to replicate that shading you need to be able to have dots of varying intensity in the daughter plate. Now going up to this leaf, there's what the leaf looks like on the genuine piece. It's lithographed, it's not intaglio. The communist government did not have very many intaglio notes in this period. Yes, they did have some. But you see all the dots in the replica. Anytime you see this kind of a pattern on a note at magnification, you're not looking at an original piece. There are very, very few notes that use a screening process for genuine, legitimate printing. There are a few, but they're far, far between. They're either line lithography, as we had on this note here, or intaglio, or they can be letterpress, depending on what the date and period date and time and locale are, you're going to see a genuine note with letterpress printing in a few slides from here. Here are two more examples of fakes of this particular note, and you can see that they're really ugly. They're not going to be candidates for fooling anybody who knows anything about the original note. Now, of course, the vendor is going to tell you, well, these were emergency issues. You know, they were printed under field conditions. You can't expect to have highly professional-looking notes. But if nothing else, the communists were pretty careful with their paper money printing. They generally did a very adequate job of it, even though it might have been fairly crude by Western standards. Here's one of many issues from the communist government in 1948 and 1949. Most of the notes of that period are lithographed. A few are intaglio. The ones that were high denominations at the time they were made are by and large intaglio. Not necessarily very good intaglio. I mean, they can be shallow intaglio, but at least they made the effort. This particular piece, the original note, is lithographed. However, it's lithographed on watermark paper. So what you want to see is the watermark. For this, I think this is pick 815. Don't hold me to that. Has a wavy line watermark. All of them have the wavy line watermark if they're genuine. So if you don't find that watermark, then the note's not original. Now this happens to be a lithograph piece as well, so the printing technology matches the original. But let's look at the seals. The seals, although the note itself is lithographed, the seals were letterpress. The seals and serial numbers. Serial numbers always have to be letterpress because you can't get running numbers. Well, I don't say can't. You don't get legitimate running numbers on a serial number unless they're letterpress, where you can rotate those numeral wheels to make a new number come up with every note. You can get what appear to be running numbers by printing 20 notes on a sheet, all with consecutive numbers with lithography. And then when you cut the notes apart and stack them up, you interleaf them so that they're in consecutive order. So when you're pulling it out of a strap, it looks like you've got, consecutive numbers. But you can only have as many different numbers as you have notes on the sheet. If you want to have different numbers than that range, and you have to have a different plate that has different numbers on it. Now let's go back to the original communist emission. It's letterpress. You can see the buildup of ink here on the edges. You can also see the indentation of this dye into the paper, causing the ink to run out to the edges. The red of the note is a different shade than the red of the seal. The seal is vermilion. This one is more of a rose red. And you can see that they're not the same color. On the counterfeit piece, the seal is not intaglio, or not letterpress. The seal is lithographed along with the rest of the note, and it's the same ink that's used for the main frame of the note. It's the same shade. So that's another evidence that even though the serial number may in fact be a running number, they may have used a legitimate serial numbering machine on the counterfeit note, and there are many out there that are fakes that have running numbers, and they might even be on silk thread paper. It's not clear to me whether this is a piece of silk thread in that paper or some other kind of disruption. But they make some effort to make the counterfeits as good as they can, but they're not always successful. In this case, they didn't have a letterpress seal to put on this note. Now here we have the genuine piece on top, which is a specimen, and the replica piece down below. This replica is printed with a very unusual technique. It's silkscreen. It's not letterpress or lithographed. It's printed with a silkscreen process. Silkscreening is a very old printing technique, and it was heavily used in Indonesia right after World War II to create counterfeits. There are lots of Indonesian counterfeits that were created with a silkscreen process. Well, we're going to show you in a few seconds here how you can determine that at 20 power on this note. Now here's the specimen serial number, and you can see the ink ridge along the edge here. That's a letterpress serial number, 6 zeros. And here's the serial number on the fake. It's also letterpress. You can see some ridges along here and also some little dropouts here. The trade-off between having embossing and ridges is having dropouts, and frequently you have both because some parts of the paper are a little bit irregular and the dye can't quite get to the paper every place, so you get a little bit of a dropout right there, but you've got an ink ridge right here. So that is a letterpress serial number. Now there's the character Guo on the genuine note, which is lithographed, and it's not lithographed very nicely. It's a fairly ugly process. These notes were being printed in many different places during the 1948-49 period, and not all of them had really good technology equipment. But here's the same character on the counterfeit. All of these speckles are places where the ink going through the silkscreen process was turned into a froth, and the froth then dried and the bubbles burst and left all this design like this. Now this is not visible with the naked eye. You need to have high magnification to see something like that. But you'd find in various places on this note that the ink is quite high off the paper because a lot of ink was pushed through that silkscreen fabric, but it doesn't have the same appearance at all that intaglio ink has under the same conditions, the same this using the printing process which is used by security printers. Now the original note was not intaglio, so you can't compare the original note with this in terms of intaglio versus silkscreen. It's only litho versus silkscreen for this particular one. So here we have the genuine on top, the replica below. This genuine is printed by letterpress, which is the most primitive form of printing. The very first form of printing that was developed. And at 20 power, you can see the ridges along the edges, lots of different places. Where you have this kind of a pattern is a good place to look for evidence of letterpress, because the ink gets pushed out to the edges, and oftentimes you get dropouts right in between because so much ink got pushed to the edge that you don't get very much left in the middle. This isn't showing very much of that, but it's something else to watch for. This is ink where it doesn't belong, that fell away from the buildup along the edge of the die here, where the die was trying to hit the paper, and after so many hundred copies, ink built up and then fell away where you didn't want it. There's the replica, again screened and multicolored. You can see red, yellow, and black all in this to form the brown that they wanted to replicate. The original note was brown like that, sort of maroonish brown, and that's the color that they got after they screened it and printed it with several different colors of ink near simultaneously. It is under ultraviolet. The original note, not on bleached paper. The counterfeit note on paper that has artificial brighteners in it. Here we have another pair. This is intaglio. It's a shallow intaglio. It's another specimen. Here we have a replica of the same note, which I believe is going to turn out to be lithographed. The intaglio isn't very deep. It's hard to make this to take the 20 power picture to show this at this magnification. A USB microscope illuminates from all directions, and you don't get a good shadowing effect of having light crossing the paper. I still try to insert light from the side using a secondary flashlight to illuminate the note from the side, so you can see a little bit of the shadowing effect. You can see that this is brighter down this side than it is down this side, because I've got light coming in from the left side to take this photograph. So this is a shallow intaglio, or it is in fact intaglio. This is a lithographed replica, and it's flat on the paper, and it doesn't give you any shadowing, although there is a lot of ink there. It may be a direct plate lithography, it may not be offset lithography, which the direct plate lithography transfers more ink than offset does. This is probably offset down below in the tint, this yellow tint behind. I don't remember what the tint, well, the tint here is so faint that it's essentially invisible. You can see little bits of evidence of it here, but not very bright. Whereas the tint on the replica is much more conspicuous. Now here we've got what kind of technology? Letterpress. This is the block characters, Roman numerals. 1 and a 2 and probably a 3 following, although they use everything from I through X for their Roman numerals. And that's, again, this is the genuine, and you can see the tint here a little bit more visible than it was right behind the intaglio, but still not very bright. And there's the counterfeit. And the counterfeit's also using letterpress technology for its serial number. So they're trying to make it look as close to the original as possible, but they're using that screened process for the main plate. And here you don't see any dots in the tint. So the tint, some way, they got a line lithography tint there, and it's actually reflecting some light back into the camera from that ink. This is a very tough piece to authenticate because it's 100% lithographed except for the seals and serials. The seals and serials are letterpress, but everything else on it is lithographed. We're going to be looking at the second muleteer, the fellow back here, second in the line in that caravan of mules. There's what he looks like at 20 power. And you can see that there's a lot of lines here. There's a lot of texture. It's lithographed, and they're doing the best they can with what they have. And there's the replica. And you can see that it's a lot of detail has disappeared. A lot of detail down in here did survive the replication process. Now this one was not screened. You don't have a lot of little dots all over the place. So this was a photographic process that selected only the black plate and then selected the yellow plate separately to replicate the main plate and the tint. The tint does go underneath the main plate. You can see it goes right across the face. They didn't make any effort on either the genuine or the counterfeit to reduce the tint where the figures are going to be. Here we've got the serial number on the genuine piece, letterpress. Here we've got the serial number on the replica, lithographed and very crude. I mean, the serial number is, you know, I don't understand how they managed to make that so crude and the rest of the note look so good. But the block characters on the counterfeit are not lithographed. They're letterpress. That's really dumb because the block doesn't change for hundreds or thousands of notes. So you can make a plate that has a lithographed element of a block character that isn't going to have to change for a long time, and then you use your running numbers, your serial numbering machine, to put your serial numbers on. In the case of this note, they made the block letterpress and the serial number lithographed, which means it's going to be this note in that position on the sheet is going to have that same number until the plate is changed. So there's I don't understand that rationale at all, that they would not use letterpress for their serials, but they did for the blocks. There's there's the block on the counterfeit. This block here is the genuine block. And there's the block on the counterfeit, which is letterpress. You can see the ink ridges along both sides. It's fairly crude, but it's not at all the same as the technology used for the serial number.